the only ASMR I've ever seen has been forced on me, but I do think there's a lot of this. That's what I remembered.
Oh, like Mike tapping.
See, okay, we're done. It's over.
Oh no!
Off to a great start.
Right. I'm gonna top off my beer before we start.
Oh, this is gold, man. You're not cutting this out.
Well, no, that was the start of the episode.
Oh, okay.
It was gonna be one of those
cold. Yeah,
it was the cold open. Like some people do the cold open where they jump like to like a really good
like excerpt.
Yeah, like 35 minutes in, you get John Mulaney to say something about doing cocaine, and then you cut to the start of the episode.
Right.
I'm doing that, but it's instead of cutting into the future, it's me just refilling my beer.
Okay, there you go.
There we go.
All right, and our sponsor for this week.
Sponsor for this week.
Well, it's Radiant Brewing, but kind of more so Villains Brewing because they brought us through most of the week.
That's true. I actually was going to do a bit about Pliny the Elder, but I think you probably make a better point that Villains is the real sponsor of our NAMM experience.
Villains is the hookup for sure. That was a highlight. So, okay, what are we... I mean, we're all here. You guys are...
This intro went from being vaguely clever to the worst really quickly.
No, it's bad. It's among the worst.
Okay, let's set the stage really quick then. Welcome to the channel. This is normally the part where there'd be a high production song, and instead, you get this. My name is Mark Johnston. If you've never been to this channel before, Jesus Christ, this was the wrong episode to pick first.
I'm John. I run a channel called Signal Path, and we're in my studio today.
Yeah.
And I'm Andrew from Ambient Endeavors, and I am in Southern California all the way from Minneapolis.
Yeah, and so basically we, Andrew and I and John have known each other for the last several years. Andrew and I have known each other for forever, and we've all kind of like known each other in the periphery of this industry. We've developed a pretty good friendship and kind of hung out here in LA a few times, including NAMM last year. And we just are wrapping up NAMM 2024. Andrew and I have been staying here at John's place. He's an LA native, and we talked about the idea that we should do a little bit of like a NAMM recap because we did no filming, took no photos, did no interviews at the show. And so in a NAMM year where there was nothing new and noteworthy at the show itself, this felt like the appropriate context to discuss what NAMM was like this year, what we liked about it, but also kind of just to like maybe get into what we think NAMM looks like going forward. We haven't discussed what we're actually going to talk about in this episode, but this was a very strange year for the industry as far as like NAMM is concerned. So it is 9:25 p.m. on the last day of NAMM right now. We are, as you can probably tell, relatively delirious. This is not going to be a good episode of anything that exists on this channel, but it seems like a good idea right now. So we're going to get into it. This is day 4. We did 3 of the days at NAMM, and we did the Effectors Market with Chase Bliss and Old Blood and all the homies. So let's start with just across all 4 days. If you had to pick one thing that kind of like got you like a little bit buzzing.
I mean, and it may be selfish, but we got to kind of host a really, really kind of amazing offsite this year. It was just sort of an extension of something we've been kind of doing for a while now, which is sort of a kind of a casual offsite hang, but we, did to actually host on the stories and kind of see, who from specifically kind of the guitar and pedal space was kind of down to hang out. And so we hosted that over at Villains Brewing, who put us up and kind of set us up with a cool space. And it sounds like that's going to kind of become maybe a regular feature, but it was just neat to kind of have everyone out and be able to have a place where it's not buzzing with the sound of amplifiers and guitar riffing and, all of those kinds of things, and actually have like the human conversations that, people are having in DMs and kind of text messages throughout the year, sort of in person. And it felt like folks that I've spoken to through the internet for years at this point, like actually getting to put like a face and a person to the sort of disembodied, Instagram handle was kind of a highlight for me.
Yeah, I kind of meant for gear.
Nope.
No, I'm kidding. I did, but I actually do agree with you. And to double down on that, it was a really, really cool thing because NAMM can sometimes feel, and if you're watching this and you're not in California or kind of in an opportunity to come to the show, it can often feel a little bit like very industry only in that way that like that event really did not. We had people from my Discord, we had people from just friends of yours who are either in or tangential to the kind of like working music scene or the like industry that we kind of all trade in and everything. And it really felt like for the NAMM show thing where everybody just kind of like hung out and didn't talk a lot of shop.
Totally.
I think like the contrast from last year's NAMM to this year was fairly stark, I would say. I feel like it was a bit of kind of crickets looking around who was or wasn't there last year. And this year, I think from Thursday on, you walked in and there's like a buzz and an energy that wasn't really there last year. So that was kind of cool to just kind of walk into and be immersed in. And yeah, I think year over year, the show becomes a lot more about friendships and connecting or reconnecting with folks at the show. But for me, I think the standout was probably playing some Novos. That booth, I mean, when anyone would ask what the takeaway or the standout was, it's like, well, there's nothing really new, but I got to play Novo in person to kind of vet those a little bit, and they're fantastic. So that was kind of the seemingly singular standout on the gear side of things for me at the show.
Yeah. I had a kind of similar experience where people were kind of texting me and going like, hey, what's like new and noteworthy at NAMM? And I kept saying like, oh, there's nothing really new. Like nobody's making any groundbreaking product announcements. I got to play a Novo for the first time. I knew from every piece of kind of contextual evidence that they were great. Now I know firsthand.
Yeah.
Great. Like they're beautiful. They're wonderful to play, but also like I already knew I was going to want one, and now I've played one and I want one.
I think in having kind of the bigger kind of end user and kind of public opening for the show, kind of for the first time in a while was really honestly refreshing. And I think when it becomes, I think it's always been sort of this like, well, it's for industry, as it kind of been like sort of the mantra of NAMM as a whole, and having the public have access. It feels like when it's industry only, everyone's got an agenda. Everyone's sort of there for a goal, and if the goal is not available, they tend to bounce fairly quickly. And it kind of feels like there's an enthusiasm and excitement that end users, the people who are going to ultimately use the products that are being explored and marketed and kind of shared at these shows. It makes way less sense in my mind to have a salesperson be the one kind of looking at all these things and being like, okay, this is the merch plan, and way more sense for people who are interested in using the product and kind of benefiting from it. I think it kind of leaves everyone at their best, and it felt like the crowd, like just the attendees were more excited than past years. It felt like, folks working were more excited because they were connecting with, individuals as much as they were sales accounts and those kinds of things. And so it felt like, as somebody who uses a lot of the products we're talking about, like it felt like everyone was kind of like happy and kind of in rare form.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that because like, I had a conversation with a company owner today, about the kind of format of NAMM. And for those of you not in the know, historically speaking, the way that the NAMM show operates is it's kind of industry only, invite only. If you want to go, you need to kind of either buy in as a kind of purchaser, media figure, or be with a company that is showing at the show. And if you are anybody else who wants to get in for years, the only way that I could get in, and for you guys as well, was you had to text like somebody at Chase Bliss or Old Blood and be like, hey, can you please put me on the list so I can come to the show, kind of thing. And until Sunday, and Sunday was always public day where anybody could kind of buy a pass to come in. And that day, as a result, was always kind of the shit show. Like everybody comes in off the street, it's chaos, but it's all concentrated to one day. NAMM last year moved from January to April, I think. And it was, like you said, Andrew, like a ghost town. Like it was really weirdly quiet, not a lot of exhibitors and not a lot of foot traffic. The NAMM organization is clearly kind of pivoting this year, maybe a little bit spooked by the last couple of years. Like the kind of like height of COVID stuff obviously was going to drive foot traffic way down. Last year, I think there was a hope that it was going to be more of a bounce back than it was. And it's interesting that the kind of decision was to open up every single day to anybody who wants to buy a day pass. The guy I talked to today, pedal company owner, expressed some kind of like frustration. Like, I don't want tire kickers wandering through all day, every day. I want buyers. I'm here to find distributors and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think the value add that NAMM is kind of changing a little bit. Like NAMM is a thing that pre-exists the social internet. And the structure of NAMM, the reason NAMM was kind of developed the way it was to solve for a thing that the social internet really kind of supersedes.
Right.
And some people, I think, are kind of grasping onto that. A good example of that would be, honestly, the Chase Bliss, Old Blood, who else, 29, and everybody else who was showing at the Effector Market sideshow, which is like, they're kind of going like, we're not even going to kind of engage with NAMM. We're just going to do a thing nearby because we can just post on Instagram that it's going to happen and get good traffic coming through there too. The funny thing is, they're not getting any buyers at that. Nobody from Sweetwater is coming through that event. Nobody who is going to kind of like engage in distribution, go, hey, I want you guys in my shop, is at that event. Nobody is doing that at that event. And that's not why they're throwing it. They're still showing up in California as a bunch of Midwesterners,
Right.
for just kind of like the social hang, the connective elements, that kind of thing. And it's interesting to kind of like look at the somewhat archaic by modern standards format that NAMM up until this year has kind of engaged in, and to see the brands that are still kind of holding on to the old format versus exactly, I think what John, you really kind of spoke to, which is like, we, especially the three of us, we are kind of all tangential to the interior of the industry in some capacities. Obviously, I do a lot of demo work and consulting with companies for like product dev stuff and beta testing. Andrew is a demo guy and runs a shop. And John, for those of you who don't know, has worked in marketing for pedal companies in this industry in the past that we will not name so that he doesn't stab me off camera later. But yeah, we have kind of those inroads to the industry, but we are, in terms of the vast majority of our lives, users, like just people who were fans of what people in this industry were making and originally wanted to come to NAMM so that we could be closer to the stuff that we dug. And we have kind of stumbled into something of the interior, but we came into this as outsiders who just liked playing guitar and thought pedals were cool. And
that's a good point.
We would not be where we are right now if not for NAMM.
True.
And there are probably people on the other side of this who, would not kind of know some brands if not for people coming to NAMM who are not buyers, who still post about and talk about and kind of like advocate for, as a kind of groundswell movement, the things that they saw at NAMM that were cool, even though they have no capacity to do anything other than take a picture of it and say, holy crap, have you seen the Chase Bliss Therme because it's 2017 and this is rad?
Well, yeah, I think that's right on it. And for me, well ahead of Signal Path existing, well ahead of really even that kind of the marketing career you were alluding to, it was just kind of the agitation of being in the show and rubbing shoulders with people who, I admired as players, as builders, as kind of like imaginations within the space. And actually sort of the work that kind of Mark was alluding to in marketing with pedals, that kind of resulted from me sort of, as I'm sure we've all had seasons of like, just kind of like rapidly browsing every pedal website we could find to find a job listing and starting a conversation with the brand owner. And it's actually probably one of the next pedals up on my channel to demo is a pedal that I ended up getting to kind of help design and speak to the marketing for. And so it was kind of one of those things. At the time I was really nobody. I was in Orange County trying to hack it as a guitarist and as kind of a part-time producer while doing kind of other side gigs and whatnot. And really NAMM was sort of the open door of just having such a concentration of the industry in one space. And I think that's something where it feels like that lever has been kind of a little bit advanced in terms of this year, where it feels like there are more people than just transactions and people who are there to make the $1 million deal and then, fly home. It feels like a lot more people who actually like personal stake in the industry and in the space, which felt really, really kind of refreshing and beautiful to me.
Yeah, I think the phrase I've been using all weekend and more as the weekend wore on was my title for this weekend was very much NAMM Relationship Edition. And that feels like what it is. Like we said at the start of this episode, there wasn't really any specific piece of gear that was new or like hype driven that I think any of us really kind of like glommed onto. It really was not just kind of like the shake hands of people that we get to see in the industry very, very infrequently. The three of us talk basically every single day and see each other twice a year tops, that kind of thing. And so this alone is like worth the trip kind of thing. But it's also got seeing guys like Ryan and Steve from 60 Cycle Hum walking the showroom floor. The Walrus Audio guys weren't showing this year, but they still showed up. And I saw Phil like every 45 minutes and then would talk for an hour and then we'd split because we're like, we have to get something done today. And then we'd run into each other again and talk for another hour.
The math on that doesn't quite add up if you were talking for an hour.
It's an hour and then 45 apart and an hour together again. But like this very much was what this year was. It was not only kind of, these are people that you talk to online all the time. Guys, like I said, like people who are on my Discord who like are either LA or LA kind of greater area who come in for the show and everything. And we get to hang with them both at the Effector Market thing and at our event at Villain Brewing and all that stuff. But also like, you know, I've been doing, as people who watch this channel know, I'm sure, have noticed a lot of like Music Man content on my channel recently. And like, that crew is amazing. And I only talk to them over email, and the opportunity to kind of get to like, just like hug Robert, who's like my AR there and is like the sweetest guy in the world, is like so much higher value than like going, hey, I heard so-and-so is going to release a new pedal this year. And I think it speaks to the kind of ongoing value of the show. Cause like, what does it look like if NAMM's gone though? Like, right. Even though the like purchasing power thing and like the ratio of buyers to looky-loos or tire kickers or whatever kind of begins to shift, nothing really brings people into one place for this industry. Guitars, synths, pro audio gear, drums, even though the drum hall is a hellscape. Like nothing creates that giant cacophony of the Guitar Center from hell like NAMM does. And for all the like chaos that is, there is nothing that does that. And I think it would be a bummer if it wasn't the thing.
I think there's this like inadvertent byproduct that folks like us kind of feel that in the past number of years, releases, I mean, certainly over COVID, releases were announced a lot of times pre-NAMM, a week or two leading up to the show, on social media, online, all that. So you show up at the show and they're really, I mean, I can't think of maybe one or two companies that were like launching or releasing a product publicly at the show. And so for us, the byproduct is that there's less clamoring around like new products, like we're saying, and sort of a little more space for even folks like us that are in the YouTube and social media influencer content sort of game to just kind of like hang out and be together and connect. You know, we're all kind of in this space when we're doing our work of filming and doing demos and things like that, where it's a fairly like independent, a fairly secluded kind of work. And so to come together and all kind of get some time with each other is really cool. And it's kind of that like shift, I think, that's been happening, that it is sort of less about the gear, a little more about the hangs.
There's amazing gear. I think that's also kind of the interesting thing, is that what it felt like is maybe it's because it's only been about 9 months since the last NAMM. Like it hasn't really been a full year cycle.
That's true.
Last NAMM was in April versus January this year. So I think there's been a little bit less time for people to sort of build up the R&D cycle. I think there's a few things that folks had kind of like whispered to us in very unsatisfying ways of, hey, something's coming. Well, yeah. What is it? Oh, we can't tell you. It's like, okay, well now it's sort of, my disappointment is immense and my day is ruined.
No, that's a good pull. I love that reference.
But I think it's my disappointment is immeasurable. But
my disappointment is measurable and my day is ruined.
But I think the thing for me that was kind of nice was that it was a kind of a unique, and this will not necessarily make sense unless you've kind of been to a trade show consecutive years, NAMM especially, where everyone's pushing the new thing, and you can kind of roll up to a booth, you roll up to Novo, you roll up to, whoever it is, and you come and you kind of want to see the thing from 2020 that you managed to miss out on because that show was bonkers. And they're kind of the marketing cycle, the freshness, the like excitement has sort of left their eyes regarding that product. But here's this new thing. And what was kind of nice is it felt very egalitarian in terms of like, if you had something you wanted to see, people were just excited to have you in the booth rather than trying to push, hey, we're trying to hit the marketing cycle for this specific product. And I think overall it just felt like NAMM Casual Friday. Like that was sort of the whole thing for the whole weekend. It just kind of felt like, and this might be just sort of being kind of a little more settled in what Signal Path is, and like it's a very different year for me because last year was like right fresh on the kind of the launch of the channel. But it feels like people were just kind of more excited to chat and less like, okay, we got to hit the PR beats and all those kinds of things. Of it was kind of one big hang, which was exciting to see.
I thought one of the last experiences at NAMM today was stopping by the Boss booth, and we got to talk to one of the reps that we've been working with, and also get to meet one of the engineers that designed the newish, the DM101, one of their analog delay pedals they put out recently. And I think the rep mentioned that this was perhaps the first year that they had allowed or invited these engineers to come to the show floor, which I thought was really cool. And he kind of was talking around this same sort of idea where like wanting to move away from the like salesy, metrics driven kind of like pushy tone of the show and a little more to the storytelling and kind of like the meet and greet or get to know some of the folks that are behind the gear that we're playing and loving. And I thought that was really, really sweet. It was cool to meet this guy who poured like 2 years of his life into developing this awesome delay pedal that is inspiring things that we're playing and writing and things like that. So cool to hear companies like Boss and certainly others that are kind of sensing that folks like us, us and you guys watching that probably are a little more interested in just hearing some of the behind the scenes or the backstory around genesis stories of products or how things came to be instead of just being sold another thing. So that's cool.
Boss as a brand obviously is the 800-pound gorilla of the industry. They basically invented the modern compact stomp box. And for many years, especially when it comes to marketing and everything, they have rested on the laurels of being the most powerful player in the game and everything. The last couple of years have been a really interesting shift for their approach to the industry, especially as they engage with both, the YouTuber class of pseudo musician but also just kind of like working with musicians, both touring musicians and internet musicians in general. The dynamic seems to be shifting in a bunch of ways.
Yeah.
The thing that I thought was interesting was Danny, the marketing guy that we talked to at their booth today, who is the best. I love that guy. He joked that he was like, oh yeah, we took all of our salespeople and gave them meetings across the street today and told them they weren't allowed to come back to the show. So it's just the engineers hanging out at the booth today. And a lot of those engineers are from Japan. And for some of them, it's their first time here. And which, first of all, bringing you to the US to send you the NAMM show is a real kick in the teeth as far as introducing you to America. Like, hey, welcome to America. It's basically a guitar center with 300,000 people in it. We're so sorry. But like, you're very right. Like, there is something I wish we focused more on that was hearing from the people who kind of design these things and the ethos behind it. A great example of that would be at our Villain event on Friday, the Red Panda crew rolled out, and they were the best, by the way. Yeah. But I talked to Kurt in the corner for a while, like away from all the chaos and the noise of NAMM and everything. And we just talked about like his philosophy with designing stuff. And he is an absolute kind of like, and I would assume self-styled and self described like nerd engineer kind of guy, like very about the details, very about his process and how I mean, if any of you have played Red Panda pedals, like there's a reason my raster pedal
Right there.
There you go.
It lives on the desk.
There's a reason that my raster video was like 90 minutes long and chopped up into like 47 chapters, and that they in turn really like appreciated that because they are 90 chapter people. But like I got so much more out of a conversation with him about why he loves to design stuff than I would ever get out of talking to like a rep representing them.
Right. And I think that was like it was wild because Boss is this, I would say at points in the run have been kind of a faceless, kind of monolithic sort of entity where it's like full interaction with the brand is seeing them at Guitar Center or kind of big channel outlets and trying it and being like, that's cool. And if it fits the board, I'll take it home. But what was actually wild about the way that they kind of mixed things up for this year was like, it felt like I was talking to the smallest builder at the show where, just to hear, and it was and I haven't actually played the product, but the DM 101 was the product. It's like, it was really neat because that's not like, I feel like at certain points with Boss, a number of their products have been catching up to the market. And there's been points where they've been kind of leapfrogged within like the control scheme for delay and reverb and some of those things. This was something where they had pushed into brand new spaces for analog delay. Like that is definitely something that is, an incredibly massive leap forward. And it was neat to hear, sort of the 2-year dev cycle of, okay, noise was the challenge, noise. And it was like just neat to hear, somebody's personal to wrestle with a problem that has moved the market and moved the solutions for musicians and users forward. And yeah, it felt like the same with a massive publicly traded company. It felt like down to the ground of like, hey, let's hear about this process as much as like, any boutique builder. That was really special.
The crazy thing is you talk about Boss like at points in history being like a faceless monolith of a company and everything. My first NAMM was in, I want to say 2014, 2015, maybe even before that. I was on tour with a big Christian recording artist as a guitar tech, and we came to NAMM and I had never been before. And we were there because he was performing at the Line 6 booth and the Boss Roland booth. And at the time, Boss Roland was upstairs on like the second or third floor with their entire own like giant like ballroom, basically giant live stage, like the size of like a 500 cap venue style stage, massive space with all these like, stations, all the different Roland synths and all this stuff. This year, Boss had like a 20 by 20 booth where it was just like engineers, a couple of reps and
gear,
but like and the gear. And the takeaway from that is not Boss is on hard times. It was the dynamic of NAMM has shifted, and also the way that Boss as a company is choosing to kind of like interact with the industry that they kind of trade in. Not necessarily Boss Roland together, but Boss as a pedal company.
Yeah.
The way they're approaching the industry has changed pretty dramatically recently. And it's been really fascinating to see because I think they're hearing customer feedback more than they probably ever have.
That's great. As to your point about kind of the grandiosity feeling like it's scaled down a little bit with the show, like you notice a lot fewer of the influencer activation photo ops where there's, like a sort of a 30-foot sculpture of guitars or kind of, cymbals flying through the air or anything like that. It felt like a lot of the ornamentation that was kind of unsubstantial has kind of fallen by the wayside. And I would expect that if, this felt like a bounce back year, it felt like something that was, maybe indicating a bit of a kind of a new strength for the show. That may come back. I don't know. I feel like the attendance and sort of the overall kind of coverage was probably similar to past years. But it was actually nice to sort of see that people were there for the substance, both to bring it and to kind of see it rather than sort of the pomp and circumstance. Like I think that's probably part of why it felt so sort of jacked down in terms of like intensity and kind of chaos. Like it just felt like people were there to experience the industry and not so much to be impressed by any one brand's sort of showcase. Like it felt like great products and great teams kind of bringing the best of what they've worked on through the year and a little bit less of who's got the best photography background, right?
One thing, so I run Little Box Effects, which sort of curates a small collection of pedals from builders around the world.
There's going to be a little lower third right there.
Scrolling
with
marquee.
littleboxeffects.com on it.
Right around.
But I feared we stopped being ridiculous for a second. So
no, but I think like NAMM is this cool opportunity to see these builders from like the smallest of companies come from across the world and have a few days here to showcase their pedals and their gear. And we got to play some pedals from a company called Kernum, which have some really cool.
Those are rad.
Those are
Yeah,
cool.
a drive and a fuzz, some MIDI implementation, this cool kind of variable. I mean, variable clipping, but so much more than that. Yeah, the mood control that you can kind of create, sort of choose your own adventure with overdrives. And then anyway, so to have that venue that you can literally shake the hands of some of the founders, the builders of these pedals is a really cool thing. And so, I mean, this video might sort of become this endorsement for coming to NAMM or figuring out a way to get to the show.
Please come.
But,
Please come.
please come.
Please come.
Damn it. You guys stepped on what was going to be my next question.
Please come to NAMM.
I'm going to ask it anyways.
Do it.
Whatever.
Let's do it.
Okay, so fine. We'll expand. I had a conversation today, this afternoon, next to the Ernie Ball booth with, once again, a friend of mine who I have known on Instagram for the last year or so. Instagram is the Instagram to NAMM pipeline is such a funny thing because it's like a musician I grew up idolizing because they played in a band that I learned how to play guitar listening to. We became Instagram friends, just randomly saw him out of my peripheral vision today, walked over, shook his hand. We talked for like 15 minutes kind of thing. Total sweetheart. I'm not going to out him. But
You can't out people as friends with Mark. That is too brutal.
I wouldn't do that to him. In the conversation that we had, he's somebody who's been coming to NAMM. He's an LA native and he's been coming to NAMM since 2002. And he was talking about kind of like when he first started coming to NAMM and he was like, oh my God, it's like a giant Guitar Center. And then we talked about and now in the modern context, it feels like an exhausting process because you've been coming for so long. And I was laughing because I said, the sentence stays the same, but the inflection changes in your first year.
That's super true.
In your first year, NAMM is, oh my God, it's like a giant Guitar Center. And after you've been doing this for a while, it's, oh my God, it's like a giant Guitar Center.
Hey, no scare away.
And it rings really true, but we alluded to earlier, there is this kind of what would the industry be like if this didn't exist? But also it only exists if people engage with it in meaningful ways. Yeah. And so what I was going to kind of build to before you guys got ahead of me in the podcast that had no script, so you had no way of knowing that, is this is the first year that every single day anybody could have come if they wanted to. In the past, Sunday was the only day, and Sunday was chaos because it was everybody going. These days, you can come any day of NAMM you want. I mean, or at least this year, and I assume that will hold true to next year. So let's assume that next year is the same thing for $150 a day or maybe some sort of bundled pass. Anybody could come to LA, go to NAMM. Should they, and why?
Yeah. So I've been coming to NAMM for, I get this, it takes me a while to figure out the number every time. I think almost 15 years. It's been a very, very long time. I'm a SoCal native, so this is something that's kind of in my backyard. And it very much, the Guitar Center comparison very much feels true of you come in as a teenager and you're like, oh my gosh, this is sort of my chance to try gear I'll never afford. And if you stick with it long enough, you'll own half of it by the time that you, if you've got the spending habits I do, I suppose.
Right.
But there's something that was said to me very early on, and one of my friends who got me in as kind of a sort of young guitar player. What he said to me, and it didn't really click, I think, until the last few years for me. And it's really, really true, is it's not what happens at NAMM, it's what happens after NAMM. And it's sort of this thing of the things that happen offsite. There's brands put together, and it kind of ebbs and flows, but brands put together things by niche, whether it's at a restaurant or a bar down the street or in the hotels that are attached to the resort or all of those kinds of things. There are things that happen, and the tricky thing is that finding out about them can be a little bit difficult. And I at first kind of thought it was because I was on the outs. And really what I would say is like the two things that really kind of helped it click for me, even like this is years into marketing and kind of the beginning of the content thing for me, that it took me to actually kind of figure out how these things function. It's that because nobody holds the keys to these events, nobody's inviting people. Like it's really something that gets put on the calendar 9 months ahead of time. The buyout gets set up, or the collaboration with whatever restaurant, whatever, it gets put on the calendar, and then nobody thinks about it after the fact.
Nobody's responsible for it.
Nobody's responsible.
There's no DRI.
There's no.
I used to have a corporate job. I know what that acronym stands for.
There's no guest list, but they just hope people come. And so the two things I would say is pay attention to like trade pubs, because that's like their only time in the year to shine is around NAMM. Like, yeah, I'm kind of down on print these days, but that is something that serves as an aggregator. I would say come with friends. Like if you are, a drive or a short flight away, bring friends, because I think NAMM alone can be overwhelming, and often, especially like, and I'm gonna, say,
and you can split the Airbnb.
That's a huge thing. But I'll speak for all of us in saying, if you're coming to the show, DM us, DM other creators that like probably have some financial stake in the show, that are people who are like actually kind of working in a sense for those kinds of things, because they'll be around. And that's the thing, like we love connecting with folks on the floor, and we're kind of trying to engineer ways to extend for our niche sort of ways that NAMM is meaningful relationally and experientially. And so I would say reach out to creators you like, reach out to brands that you're interested in. And then at the show, I mean, I would say when you get here, this is sort of my NAMM tips for someone who did NAMM horribly for way too long. While you're at the show, ask what people are doing afterwards, and usually there's some kind of rumbling of, well, I heard I heard Earthquaker did a phenomenal event this year, and they kind of have, I think, a pretty regular engagement for that kind of stuff. And
there's the occasional like NAMM thing that is invite only, but that stuff is almost exclusively NAMM put on. Like NAMM Creator Night, where they send out an email to like specific people, and that
wasn't on that list.
Well, and that thing I was, but it was the same night that we were doing our.
Proud of you, Mark.
It was the same night that we were doing our event at Villain, and I had some YouTube friends of mine being like, because I said I think tonight's gonna be nuts, and they were like, I know. It's going to be really crazy. And I was like, I know, I'm really excited. And they were like, yeah, Corey Feldman's supposed to be there. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? Because I'm not ready for Corey Feldman to be at our weird small party.
He wasn't there.
And they were different events. It was the kind of like invite only creator events, which is, for the record, I heard mid anyways.
No, it's got Corey Feldman, so I don't know how it could be mid.
I stand firm on the idea of Corey Feldman is better than actual Corey Feldman could ever hope to be. But our event, like we plastered our event over social media. Okay, do it. What's your
Mark's opinions do not reflect the aggregate. Okay. I need a disclaimer in there.
No.
I don't know if
I was gonna double down in a way that might get me in trouble, so I'm not going to.
If Corey Feldman wants to be on my demo of the Illumin Reverb, I would absolutely love to have him.
Our event, we plastered it all over kind of like our Instagrams and everything. But in the same thing that John was saying with that kind of idea of like no key like individuals that are responsible for it, I don't think we did an amazing job beyond just going like, hey, let's put on Instagram stories and hope people show up. For context, last year we did a similar meetup at Bottle Logic a little farther out, and great brewery. I like that we're avoiding talking trash about breweries, just like we avoid talking trash about brands on camera. But,
only good vibes.
But we did Bottle Logic last year, and kind of like put the invite out to people we just knew were around the show, and we had like 8 or 9 people show up. And this year it just kind of worked out because John is homies with some of the great people over at Villain. And they were like, hey, we could put you up in this like private room. What's your kind of like head count? We're like, I don't know, probably 15 to 20. We did like 7 to 10 last year. And then we were like, maybe it's 25. And they're like, we're going to move you to this outside private patio area that's like big enough that you're nervous that you're going to look like an idiot for having it. And we had like 50 to 75 people show up. And it wasn't like we did a lot of like groundwork for it. It was just kind of, I think there was it's outdoors. It's going to be relational. There will be no pedal boards.
Amen.
And the theme for the hang next year is going to be no stairway, no vlogging. And that is the kind of stuff that I think makes NAMM worth being at. The show itself is worth it in very small doses, but for so many of us, I'm up in Sacramento. I have some local music friends. All of my closest musical influences, inspirations, encouragers, collaborators are all online. I write more music with these two guys than I do with anybody in Sacramento proper. And maybe that's my antisocial tendencies. Maybe that's that they're better musicians than anybody in Sacramento. I don't know. But like for so many of us, like whether it's you're a part of a music Discord or you just kind of engage on Facebook, like Facebook music groups, like the 60 cycle groups, or on YouTube or on Discords for like EAE or anybody else, you mostly know people who are 1 to 48 states away from you, that kind of thing. And this is one of the few opportunities to really get everybody in one spot. And it's not about the thing that gets everyone into the city. It's about the things that happen around that event. It's the things that kind of happen when you're not trying to talk over 17 people demoing the newest quadruple rectifier amp at a level that is just absolutely criminal.
Yeah, and I think, one thing this is kind of a personal thought on the show, and kind of having been someone who's really kind of benefited in my journey as a musician, just being encouraged by like seeing, like, this is one thing I'll say: if you're into guitars, go to the guitar section.
Absolutely.
But whatever you're into, you should walk the entire show, because what you'll see in the way of drumming talent and like it was like almost difficult to stand in the synth section because the parody of performance that was going on there was just like unbelievable. And so there's something like to be said for it makes you feel small, and I think a really beautiful way. And that often I think we hit barriers in our creativity where you feel like you've hit the ceiling. And for me, that all kind of lights a fire of like, oh, there is more to discover and there's more to see. But I will say, for like, all the beauty, I think all the benefit of those offsite things, I think it's important to support the show. And that's my personal thought, is there's really no NAMM after party without NAMM. I think you can,
twice in a row. That was terrible.
I think you can get a great experience just, being in town and hanging out for those things. But there's something that like it feels like incomplete without the other. Like both sides kind of, seeing the wash noise helps kind of make the sidelines more beautiful. At the same time, the sidelines almost make no sense if you don't have that touch point of, oh, you saw the Nova booth, right? No, I'm going tomorrow. Those kinds of conversations and touch points are really fun too.
And also, if you're on the West Coast, it's a relatively easy thing. I drove down from Sacramento, and if you're in the Midwest or the East Coast, dude, it's Southern California in January. You probably want to be here.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
you don't have to salt the roads.
John Wayne Airport is a 30-minute security line.
Yeah, flying to John Wayne for sure. Yeah. So John Wayne or Long Beach.
Yeah, Long Beach is sort of the sort of sleeper, I think, for NAMM, but it's a good option for
these. Sure. Yeah, these are the real tips in this episode. If you made it,
John Wayne.
47 minutes in, you're getting the actual practical help from this episode.
Do not pay for parking. That's another thing.
That's a
DM
hot
me,
tip.
And I will not give you my spot, but I know the other ones. So I can't blow up my spot, but
park on.
No, no.
I was gonna bleep this.
Bleep this out. Yeah. We're gonna
Avenue.
We're gonna flash the address. The house you're gonna park in front of right here. It's gonna be the.
I do remember my first name too, though, and I think like I would just repeat the things that John has already said, so I'll try not to. But going on my own with kind of no goal or agenda the first year was like incredibly daunting. And I remember leaving the first day being like, screw it. Like, I don't even know if I want to go back kind of feeling. And each year is a little bit different. And for me personally, and kind of for us, I think on this side of the camera, it probably feels a little bit different where there's objectives and there's relationships that we go for. But I would totally echo the go with a friend advice. Find someone that's in the area down here, bring a friend along, convince someone to buy a plane ticket and fly across the country, would share the Airbnb like Mark and I have done.
Or just we're all on various music discords. Find somebody who's going to be there anyways.
Totally.
Yeah, to like find someone that's like, hey, can we hang for the show? I think that's great to make a plan.
Yeah. And I had the exact same experience as you. My first time, like I said, I came down with a recording artist who I was working for. They flew me down the day ahead of everybody else because it was cheaper. And so I did day one of NAMM for the first time ever, completely solo. And I remember getting in like 10 minutes into it, and I knew one person who was working one booth, and I spent the whole day at his booth because I was so kind of like social anxiety overwhelmed. Yeah. It was brutal. So John is right. Bring a friend. NAMM requires a buddy system.
I was going to say about 3 years ago, I had kind of left marketing in the music industry. I was fully outside of it. And Mark was sort of I was sort of the helicopter to sort of Mark's NAMM experience for that year. So
he says that like I would function at all by myself in a venue that size. My social anxiety skyrockets when I'm solo so fast. It's the worst.
It's intense, and I would say give yourself some grace if you're settling in for the first time too.
Yeah, it's daunting, it's brutal, but like if you are somebody who like loves this industry and you are somebody who can at all kind of justify this kind of thing, obviously flying halfway across the country, flying a state away, flying fully across the country is expensive. It is a kind of a place of privilege to be able to do this kind of thing, whether or not it's a tax write-off because you work in the industry or just because you can afford to do it at all. But I think all of us have this love-hate relationship with NAMM where we ultimately kind of go, we are so grateful that it exists. We wouldn't know each other in the ways that we do. Andrew and I met in person at NAMM through total happenstance. It was a year that I was walking the floor with Matt Hoops from 1981 Inventions, which is another one of those we only know each other through NAMM.
Different than the Matt Hoops from Relient K. That's important to say.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Matt Hoops, CPA and builder of 1981 Inventions. This podcast is getting so dumb. And literally we just kind of were like headed down one of the hallways and we ran into Andrew and he introduced himself to me. And I recognized Analog Endeavors at the time, before Ambient Endeavors had launched. And it was the face to the name that really fundamentally changed the Instagram relationship that we had, the online relationship. And you meet people in person, and whether it's the Chase Bliss anniversary party in Minneapolis this year, whether it's like the Effector meetups that happen in Brooklyn or Nashville or wherever else, it's like, if you can make it out to something like this, I think it's worth it. If it's anywhere in the country where like builders are getting together and doing a cool thing, it's not only worth supporting the kind of like companies that you like dig and want to see kind of continue to do well, but also if you can make it to this specifically, it is worth having to be in LA for 5 days, which is a tall order. Sorry, John, but like it's a parking lot and I hate it.
28 years and we're still here, so I'm keeping that streak alive.
Okay, I think the way that we should probably start to wrap this up, because I feel like we are going to be off the rails relatively soon. And honestly, I really want to go to bed. I think there's a few kind of pieces of actual gear, just because that's the point of this channel, that I think were really cool. And we should kind of touch on a few of those as the wrap up. That way, when angry comments about us rambling for 40 minutes start going, I can go, well, you should have watched the last 5 minutes of it. I'm going to start. Novo. We already talked about Novo, but they are doing those new custom mastery kind of like Z-shaped trem arms. with the custom plate, the oversized custom plate. And I think those are incredibly rad. That was like something that if I had only heard about this on paper, I wouldn't have been stoked on it. But the first experience I had with it was in person.
Yeah.
And it made total sense as an ergonomic decision.
It's ergonomic, but like, and this is probably placebo, but I think that having the leverage offset, just like, having a little bit of that off axis travel in a different way, like it feels very different. The way that arm flexes, like it gives you a different curve. The way that a Bigsby to like a Jazzmaster or Mastery or Descendant trem works, something about like just a difference in the lever you're pulling actually makes it feels like it gives it a little bit of personality. You can kind of shoehorn like what you're looking for from the feel of how you use it, but it did actually like make a tactile difference to me, and that usually translates into how I play when a guitar kind of subverts that sort of habit.
An offset guitar with an offset trem handle, just Nova guitars, none more offset.
That's right.
I think there's two things for me that stood out along with the Novas, obviously. It was cool to see Vox introduce a whole new line of hand-wired amps.
I was standing kind of like nearby when somebody came over and started, I think it might have been like Phil X, started demoing one of them. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that like a loud ass Vox in person is just like the best thing.
Yeah. I mean, some of us like kind of grew up on those 10 years ago, 15 years ago. To kind of see them do a refreshed line of amps, the hand-wired series is exciting. I'm really stoked to see and hear those. And then kind of on the other end of the spectrum, getting to play some of the Poly stuff, a builder over in Australia.
Amazing.
I know Mark's demoed the Verbs, but hearing him playing that specific pedal, it was just like pretty mind-blowing, the variety of sounds and in that pedal, and then also seeing his other, what's the other like multi effects?
Oh, the Bebo, the Hector,
the way that he's kind of refreshed and designed that whole thing was really, really cool. So seeing smaller builders like that from overseas doing really cool things and kind of pushing the envelope in design and sound was really cool, in contrast to the big brands that are just kind of doing their semi 5 years, every 5 years kind of releases of new lines of amps. So,
and I mean, you guys kind of stole sort of 1 and 2 for me. So I think
I've got a 3 if you need it.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of an interesting thing. And this is, I mean, at 10:15 p.m. on Sunday. So we've done this for 4 days, and it's kind of been a long weekend. So I feel like I have like a lot of unpacking to do. But one of the things that I thought was actually really, really interesting and wasn't there to see was the Jackson Britain. That was kind of in that sort of a piece that was really interesting to me. So for me, Gavin at Jackson was actually the first dude to send me a pedal with the channel. And so that was kind of special to see him, but like kind of looking at some of the stuff that they had to show, the New Wave and all that kind of stuff. I was playing through the McFly and then the Britain, which is their kind of first to roll off the line. And that feels like an interesting thing. It's not really like because of the history and obviously the fact that they, were out of production, sort of an interesting moment, right? Like to see that kind of come back and the announcements of that coming back to market. And so really loved the way it sounded. I'm immensely curious what it'll look like for the business and kind of all of those kinds of things of how they're planning to bring it back. And that really matters to me.
Yeah. I think that when we talk about NAMM Relationships Edition, Jackson's role in this industry right now is quintessential.
Totally.
NAMM Relationships Edition. Like they make some really, really formative stuff. Like the amp line back in the day before it kind of like went away for a while and everything, made serious waves in a few different genres and everything. And the way it ended was pretty contentious. And I know that there's like, after kind of all the dust settled and all the chaos, very often once the anger gets bored, nobody really pays attention to kind of where anything went after that.
Right.
And as far as we can tell, like a lot of people were made whole in the kind of aftermath of that and everything. And like they've kept on with the pedal company has created a bunch of really cool stuff and partnered with a lot of really cool people. They're a very relational brand in a lot of ways. And watching them kind of slowly bring back the Ampworks side of things, I think, probably has a lot of our attention in terms of what is this going to look like?
Yeah.
Is it going to be kind of like former glory, because they were
Incredible
really
stuff.
dominant and really phenomenal at a stage where they were kind of at their peak and everything. And there's no way they haven't learned a lot in the interim.
Totally.
And so, yeah, no, I'm legitimately optimistic for what that can be.
Yeah, and I mean to speak to the sounds, like I feel like I rarely connect with British things. Like it's like that kind of thing. Like when it comes to amp stuff, it feels like there's a brightness and an edge that I never quite have control of. And I was really impressed. I don't know if it's the ported cab or what the scenario was, but was kind of, it's hard at NAMM with the wash of noise and all the things you're experiencing, like on a sensory level, to feel like you noticed anything. And that was kind of one thing that stood out to me above even the pedals was the amp. So it was cool.
Speaking of British things,
I think we're about to say the same thing.
We did connect with the crew at Victory, and they're great dudes, and getting to hang out with them was awesome. And so I'm excited to kind of see where their new releases land, and the stuff that they're working on is always kind of exciting. John's ready to talk.
Oh God,
I'm going to be the first one to make the joke about shooting the deputy.
Oh no, stop it. No.
On Mark's channel, you heard it here first. Mark shot the sheriff, and he's hoping to shoot the deputy.
Yeah, so for context, it's funny, we were at the Victory booth, and we were talking to Daniel and Alex over at Victory. Absolute sweethearts, just great guys. And a lot of their amp line has been kind of like set in stone and kind of updated over time.
Yeah.
But they had kind of their big like hype new releases, which is the 2 new MK like really high-end boutique amps.
Incredible.
And I went to Daniel and I was like, hey, like how's the response on those right now? Like they seem like they're pretty insane. Like they're incredibly high quality hand-wound, or like not hand-wound, hand-wired. Very like whatever our lead designer wanted to make, no matter how expensive, no matter how intricate. And he was like, oh, the response has been great. The thing that I'm really into right now is the Deputy. And I was like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And it's basically the channel 1 of the Sheriff. And I have the Sheriff preamp, the no power amp section valve version of that.
Yeah.
And channel 2 never really, I mean, if you've seen my video on it, you'll know I didn't really touch super heavily on channel 2. It's a little closer to kind of that crack and gain stage without being that fully rectified thing. Channel 1 is where all that kind of like touch responsive plexi beauty is. And the Deputy is very much a double down on channel 1, kind of low to medium gain Marshall stuff. It's got really killer cleans. It's got kind of just enough that breakup, a 3-position voice switch and all that stuff. And it really was one of those things where I was like staring at that at the show today being like, how do I get that in my studio? Because if you've been following any of my amp journey recently, you've probably known that I'm going farther and farther into that plexi world with every passing week. And the Deputy was something that I really was like, oh, that into my tube amp expander with the like Victory IRs would be like the game set match for all of my like post-rock or post-hardcore nonsense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, this is sort of an aside, but to all the brands who do show at NAMM or do announce at NAMM, please get that out a week before NAMM so that people know what to beeline for when they get to the show.
Yeah,
rather than finding out about it day 3 where you're like, oh wait, we went by that booth twice and we didn't get to play it.
That's actually a good point. We started this episode by saying like, what's new and noteworthy at NAMM? And I said nothing. And then today we learned there was a brand new amp that I was like really obsessed with from Victory. We had walked by Victory like 4 times and I just never noticed it because it was in the corner.
I think we kind of shy away from being when people are actively playing and enjoying. I think we're kind of active. We're not necessarily the first to sort of be like, I'm also going to add to this noise. So
yeah,
that's part
true.
of it.
We run in the opposite direction from anybody demoing an amp loudly. And pretty much everybody at Victory did a good job of keeping it under control, but they were next to a couple of booths. And if you've been to NAMM, you know how it is to be next to
your neighbors matter.
Yeah,
and Victory had some rowdy
neighbors.
Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it. That's funny. Yeah, I think that's the point where we're gonna call this. I feel like we got a little bit of gear talk in at the end there. I have no idea if this is at all a good thing to put on my channel. Maybe I'll know when we edit. Maybe I'll know when I get angry comments on YouTube.
I'll put it on mine if it helps. I mean, here's the deal: if we put it on mine, no one's gonna see it. So
Okay, we're gonna put an unedited version on his channel.
Slightly edited version.
Nope. It's just gonna be 30 seconds long, and it's just gonna be all the streets you can park on near NAMM.
That's right.
Inside joke.
We're losing track right now. Okay, once again. My name is Mark Johnston. You know that because you're on my channel right now. Andrew from Ambient Endeavors. John from Sigma Path. John, put your fucking mic down.